Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most well-known yet utterly chaotic myths of all time. Zeus, the mighty king of the gods, had more love affairs than anyone could keep track of, and, spoiler alert, most of them were a bit of a disaster. From mortal women to goddesses, his list was as long as the laundry line on Olympus, and it's almost impressive how he could charm the pants off just about anyone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. Now, comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's see how far this myth travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through the ancient, sprawling landscape of Olympus, where the gods are. Less divine and more, well, messy. Zeus, the top god, was a serial lover long before the term was even a thing. Picture this: you're hanging out in the palace of Olympus, drinking ambrosia with the gods, and suddenly Zeus shows up, strutting around like he owns the place. In one hand, he's holding a thunderbolt, and in the other, he's holding yet another mortal woman in his arms. It's almost like he collects them, you know. And you're probably thinking, this guy must be smooth, and he was, but maybe a little too smooth. Every time Zeus found a pretty mortal or a gorgeous goddess, he'd be all over them, charming, persuasive, and more than a little manipulative. In fact, you might find yourself thinking, oh no, this isn't going to end well for her. And spoiler alert, it doesn't. Zeus never really plays fair, especially when his wife, Hera, isn't looking. You probably won't survive this tale, either, lucky for you. This is all just ancient myth, but before you roll your eyes and think, this is just another one of Zeus's "everyone I touch is instantly in trouble" episodes. Consider the story of his love for a mortal woman named Europa. Now, don't laugh. Europa was a princess, a beautiful one at that, and Zeus decided to turn himself into a white bull. Yes, you heard me right, a bull. He had the gall to think, hey, if I'm a beautiful white bull, I'll definitely be able to seduce her. Totally believable. And Europa, who had no idea this was the king of the gods, found the bull so charming that she hopped on his back for a little ride. So there she was, just minding her business. And boom, Zeus, now in the form of a bull, swims across the sea with her on his back. I mean, if a bull suddenly started walking up to you on a beach, would you really get on it? I didn't think so. But this wasn't just any bull, this was Zeus, and he was about to take her to Crete, where he'd reveal his true form. And yes, they had kids, which somehow, and I mean somehow, was considered romantic in the ancient world. But here's the kicker: some scholars still argue whether Europa was in on it, or just plain duped. Either way, she ended up having a pretty sweet deal. Zeus gave her a countenance. She got a whole countenance. Imagine that. If Zeus were around today, I'm sure he'd just start handing out states, like, here's Texas, enjoy. But let's take a detour into one of Zeus's other loves, one that's a little bit more tragic and a lot more confusing. Enter Leda, another mortal beauty who fell prey to Zeus's, well, charm. Leda was married to a king, but that didn't stop Zeus. You know what he did? He transformed himself into a swan. Yes, a swan. And the way the myth goes, Zeus the swan swooped down and seduced Hermond. From that union, to eggs hatched. Inside, you'd find two mortal children, Helen and Polydeuces. But here's where it gets crazy. Some versions of the story suggest that Leda also had children with her husband. which means Leda had two sets of kids, one from Zeus and one from her human husband. Imagine the family reunion. Hey, I think we're related, but maybe we shouldn't compare notes. Anyway, Helen, you know, the one from the Trojan War. Yep, that Helen. She started the biggest war in ancient Greece, all because of a simple love affair. And here's the twist: some scholars still argue about whether Leda even knew Zeus was the swan, or if she was just, well, complicit in this confusing myth. Talk about a rough day for Leda. But we can't stop there, because Zeus had a thing for transformation. He loved switching shapes to get his way. Sometimes he was a golden shower, sometimes a bull, sometimes a swan, and sometimes even an eagle. Yeah, that's right, Zeus once turned into an eagle to get close to Ganymede, a stunningly handsome Trojan prince. Ganymede was a youth like no other, and Zeus was so taken with him that he whisked him away to Olympus. There, he made Ganymede the cupbearer to the gods. Ganymede lived a sweet life, literally handing out nectar and ambrosia to the gods. Meanwhile, back on Earth, his father, the king, was losing his mind, thinking his son was dead. But I guess, if your son's job is to serve Zeus, it's not that bad, right? The only odd thing, some still debate whether Ganymede's trip to Olympus was voluntary or not. Was he flattered, or was he just another Zeus project? You decide. And if you're wondering why Zeus never faced any consequences for his behavior, well, Hera might have had a few things to say about it, but she was, well, kind of busy running Olympus herself. Sometimes, it felt like Zeus could do no wrong, or maybe, like many of us, he just didn't think things through. At the end of the day, Zeus's affairs left behind legacies, legends, and heroes, but also plenty of messes. His escapades didn't just involve love. They involved power plays, family feuds, and sometimes just plain bad decision-making. It's almost as if he was playing a cosmic game of Risk, but using humans as pawns. Some gods would come from his unions, while others would carry on his chaos. All these connections made Olympus feel a lot less divine and a lot more human. And yet, you can't help but admire the guy for his persistence. If you're ever feeling down, just remember, Zeus was a god, and yet, somehow, his love life was even more of a mess than yours. As you sink deeper into this journey, you find yourself standing before a curious and mysterious box. It's the kind of box that tempts you, pulls you in with an unspoken promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. You glance over your shoulder, but there's no one there to stop you, no one to warn you. This, of course, is Pandora's box, the fabled vessel of unimaginable power. And you know deep down that you're about to make a decision you'll regret. Let's face it, too probably won't survive this. So, before you get too comfortable with this tantalizing sense of impending doom, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. Don't forget to comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's see just how far this myth can stretch tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of Pandora begins in a time when the gods were still meddling in the lives of mortals. Zeus, ever the unpredictable force, had a scheme to punish humanity after Prometheus, that lovable troublemaker, stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. In retaliation, Zeus ordered the creation of Pandora, a woman of such beauty and charm that even the gods couldn't help but admire her. She was a gift, or rather, a curse, crafted by Hephaestus, the god of fire. and then blessed by the other gods with gifts, one a symbol of divine power. But the catch, well, there's always a catch, isn't there? You see, Pandora wasn't just a simple woman. She was the embodiment of everything humanity had yet to understand: curiosity, beauty, and a little too much temptation. And when she received a small, mysterious box from the gods, Zeus warned her not to open it, not even a crack. And of course, she opened it. You can already see how this story plays out, can't you? It's like when you're told not to peek at the Christmas presents, but you just can't resist. It's the same thing, really. Pandora, though she was given all the gifts of the gods, couldn't resist the one thing that was hers alone. The box. Pandora, as it turns out, was just as mortal as the rest of us. She had her flaws, curiosity being the most notable, and the temptation to open the box was simply too strong. So, with trembling hands, she lifted the lid, and that's when everything went south. The box wasn't empty, like she probably hoped, and it wasn't filled with riches or divine gifts. No. Instead, it released all the evils that would plague humanity forever: disease, war, suffering, and despair. The world went from peaceful to chaotic in the blink of an eye, and Pandora, realizing her grave mistake, slammed the lid shut. But there was one thing left inside, something no one expected. It was hope. The very last thing left in that box, nestled in the shadows, was hope. Some scholars argue whether hope was truly a blessing or just another curse. After all, if hope exists in a world full of suffering, does it truly offer comfort, or does it simply make the pain more bearable? Pandora's box remains a symbol of human curiosity. The kind of curiosity that sometimes leads to disaster, but also, oddly enough, keeps us going. Hope, after all, is something we cling to in the darkest times, even if it seems like it might be a bit of a cruel joke. But let's pause for a moment and consider a lesser-known detail about Pandora's story. While she's often seen as the one responsible for unleashing all the world's evils, there's a chance that she wasn't entirely to blame. You see, in some versions of the myth, it's suggested that Pandora wasn't told the whole story by the gods. Some accounts argue that the box was not just a gift, but a kind of tester challenge placed before Pandora by Zeus to see how she would handle it. Was it an inevitable fall from grace, or was it a preordained punishment for humanity's overreach? And what about her curiosity? Was it in her nature to open the box, or did the gods want her to? Some scholars still debate whether Pandora was simply a victim of divine trickery, or if she was, in fact, a willing participant in her own downfall. In either case, the myth of Pandora gives us one of the most enduring metaphors for human nature. We're always tempted to open that box, to see what lies beyond the veil, and we can never truly know what we'll find. The moment Pandora opened the box is a moment that resonates with us all. We've all faced moments of temptation, haven't we? That feeling of knowing we shouldn't do something, but doing it anyway. Maybe it's peeking at a spoiler for your favorite TV show, or indulging in that extra slice of cake when you know you should stop. In a way, Pandora's box is a reflection of our own nature, the part of us that yearns for the unknown, even if it means uncovering a bit of chaos. It's a dangerous game, this curiosity of ours, but it's also what makes us human. Just as Pandora couldn't resist the pull of the box, we often can't resist what lies just out of reach. We know we might regret it, but we do it anyway. In the end, we're left with the consequences, and like Pandora, we wonder if hope is the only thing that can get us through it. But let's get back to the myth itself. The gods didn't just sit back and let Pandora suffer in silence. After all, they had set this whole thing in motion. In some ways, they were complicit in the chaos that followed. Zeus, in particular, was never one to take responsibility for his actions. After all, he was the one who had decided humanity needed a little punishment. As Pandora tried to make amends, the evils that had been released swirled around her, festering in every corner of the world. It's almost as if Pandora's box wasn't just a myth, but a reflection of human history itself. Time and again, we've found ourselves facing consequences we didn't anticipate. And time and again, we've had to wrestle with the question, is hope enough to make it all right? By now, you may have noticed that Pandora's story isn't just one of doom and glooms, also one of redemption, however small that redemption might seem. In the myth, hope remains in the box, and it's the one thing that keeps humanity from spiraling into total despair. It's almost poetic, really. In the face of all the suffering, hope becomes the last light in the dark tunnel. And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps us going, knowing that, despite everything, there's always the possibility that things might get better, even if the odds are stacked against us. So, the next time you find yourself peering into the unknown, wondering whether you should open that metaphorical box, remember Pandora. She didn't just release evil into the world, she also released the possibility of hope, however fleeting it may be. You step deeper into the shadows, feeling the cool breeze of the ancient world swirl around you. You might not have expected this particular tale to be part of your journey tonight, but here you are, face to face with one of the most terrifying and tragic figures in Greek mythology, Medusa. Now, you've probably heard of her hair made of snakes, a gaze that turns anyone to stone, the whole package. But what you probably didn't know is that Medusa's transformation into the monster we know today wasn't always her fate. No. She started off just like anyone else, young, beautiful, and with the kind of face that could stop people in their tracks. You probably wouldn't survive this story either, but then again, you've made it this far. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. Don't forget to comment where you're listening from and what time it is this myth might reach. Some unexpected places tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medusa's story begins in a time when the gods were still indulging their every whim and desire. She wasn't always the feared creature she's remembered as today. In fact, Medusa was once a beautiful mortal woman, a priestess of Athena. Her beauty was so enchanting that it was said to rival even that of the gods. People were in awe of her, and it wasn't just mortals. Other gods, too, took notice. And one of those gods, Poseidon, the god of the sea, saw Medusa and was taken by her beauty. So, one day, Poseidon approached her in Athena's temple. It was here, in this sacred space, that Poseidon violated Medusa, and in the aftermath, she was left alone, humiliated, and broken. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of standing by Medusa, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, punished her for being the victim of this terrible act. In a fit of rage and jealousy, Athena transformed Medusa into the creature we now know, a hideous monster, with snakes for hair and the ability to turn anyone who looked at her into stone. Some scholars still argue whether Athena's punishment was truly justified, or if she was simply too caught up in the idea of purity and divine punishment. Was Medusa a victim or a villain? Did she deserve to be punished for something she had no control over, or was it just another one of the gods' cruel decisions? This transformation of Medusa into a monster is more than just a physical change. It's symbolic of how, in the world of the gods, those who were once admired and revered could fall from grace in an instant. Medusa, once a beauty, now became a symbol of fear and isolation. In the blink of an eye, she went from being a priestess of Athena to being an outcast, someone who couldn't even show her face without causing harm. It's a pretty dark reflection on the idea that beauty or power could be so fleeting, and that those who once had it could lose it in a flash. Medusa's transformation is a stark warning about the fickle nature of the gods and the power they hold over mortal lives. They could make and unmake you with a single word, and often it wasn't even because of something you'd done. Just like that, Medusa's life was forever changed. Now, she wasn't just feared for her gaze. She was feared for what she represented: the fragility of beauty, the cruelty of the gods, and the inevitability of fate. As time passed, Medusa's reputation grew. She became more than just a tragic figure. She became a monster, one that people feared, and who could blame them? She could turn anyone to stone with just a glance. She became a figure of terror, living in isolation, surrounded by her own monstrous creation, snakes that hissed and writhed in her hair. Yet, even in her monstrous form, Medusa was still a figure of sympathy. Her story wasn't one of evil or malice. It was a story of a woman who had been wronged by the gods and transformed into something unrecognizable. Was she truly a villain, or was she just a victim of the gods' whims? Some scholars still argue whether Medusa was inherently evil or simply the product of the way the gods treated her. It's a question that lingers, one that asks whether the things that we fear are really the fault of the things themselves, or whether it's the result of the forces that made them that way. Then, of course, there's the hero of this tale, Perseus. He's the one who eventually ends Medusa's life, but not before a long journey, complete with divine aid. The gods, as always, decided to help Perseus by providing him with the necessary tools for the Jaban invisible helmet, winged sandals, and, most notably, a reflective shield. Perseus's mission wasn't just about killing Medusa. It was about claiming her head as a prize, a trophy to be taken back as a symbol of his bravery. And while the story of Perseus and Medusa's death is often glorified as a tale of heroism, it's worth asking, was Medusa truly the villain here? She had been punished by the gods for something she didn't deserve. She had become a monster. Yes, but was it her fault? As Perseus beheaded Medusa, her blood spilled out and created two creatures, the winged horse, Pegasus, and the giant, Chrysaor, both born from the blood of a woman who had been wronged by the gods. Even in death, Medusa left behind something beautiful, something that would go on to become part of another myth. The tragic irony of Medusa's life is that her legacy wasn't one of pure villainy, but one of transformation, both literal and symbolic. Some scholars still argue about how we should view Medusa. Is she a tragic figure deserving of sympathy, or is she a monster whose actions, however forced upon her, led to death and destruction? It's a difficult question, and one that reveals the complexity of the Greek myths themselves. In the world of the gods, it seems that no one, not even the most beautiful or the most wronged, can escape their fate. Medusa, who once had everything, now stands as a reminder of how quickly one can fall. Yet her story also leaves us with a sense of sadness and injustice. She didn't ask for this fate, and yet it was thrust upon her. And while Perseus might have taken her head, he didn't take away the sorrow that came with her transformation. It's almost as if the gods were punishing Medusa for her own beauty, as though it was too much for the world to handle. As you continue your journey through the myths of ancient Greece, Medusa's story might stay with you. It's a reminder that beauty, power, and even good intentions can be twisted and warped by forces beyond our control. It's a sad reality in the world of the gods, one where heroes and villains are often defined not by their actions, but by their circumstances. Medusa wasn't just cursed by the gods, she was cursed by her very existence, and in the end, she became a symbol not of evil, but of the cruelty that can come when divine powers play with mortal lives. So, the next time you glance into the face of a statue or encounter something that seems too perfect to be true, remember Medusa. Remember the woman who was once beautiful, once loved, and once human before the gods decided otherwise. Now, you find yourself standing at the edge of a vast and daunting landscape, a place where every step takes you closer to the Herculean feats of legend. You've heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. Hercules, the greatest of all Greek heroes, renowned for his strength and bravery, and also for being one of the most complicated figures in mythology. His 12 labors, his many trials, his triumphs and failures, they're the stuff of legend. But, much like the heroes of any good bedtime story, Hercules' journey wasn't as simple as slaying monsters and winning glory. No, the story of Hercules is one of redemption, tragedy, and, let's face it, a whole lot of bad luck. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And if you're feeling brave, comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see where these myths go. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Hercules' story begins long before he faced the 12 labors. Born as the son of Zeus and the mortal Arachne, Hercules had greatness in his blood, though not necessarily the kind of greatness he would have wanted. As a child, Hercules showed strength beyond any mortal. He could kill monsters, move mountains, and perform feats no one thought possible. Yet, it wasn't his strength that made him a hero, was the fact that he was cursed by the gods from the moment he was born. The story goes that Zeus's wife, Hera, was none too pleased with her husband's many affairs, especially with a mortal woman like Arachne. So, in true Hera fashion, she decided to make Hercules' life as difficult as possible. As soon as he was born, Hera cast a spell to make sure his life was filled with suffering. From his earliest years, Hercules' path was shaped by the whims of the gods, something that, let's be honest, would have made most people give up by the time they reached their first task. But not Hercules. No, he kept going, despite the fact that the gods seemed to be playing a game with him, and he was nothing more than a pawn. But what's a myth without a little divine intervention, right? Enter the 12 labors trials given to Hercules by King Eurydice. The king, terrified of Hercules' strength and abilities, thought that by sending him on these impossible tasks, he could get rid of the mighty hero once and for all, and, of course, that's where the real fun begins. Hercules was tasked with slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the golden hind of Artemis, and completing a whole list of other impossible feats. And here's the twist: some of these tasks weren't just about brawn, they were about ingenuity. For example, when he had to capture the Cyrenean hind, he didn't just chase it down like some common hunter. No, he spent a full year chasing the creature across the land, showing just how relentless he was. And that's the thing about Hercules. You can't simply defeat him with a sword. You have to wear him down, make him struggle, and even then, he keeps pushing forward until there's no way but victory. It's a bit like trying to finish a marathon, only to realize that halfway through, you forgot to stretch first. But Hercules, he kept running, even when his legs felt like they'd give out. But not every task was about brute strength. Take, for instance, the labor where Hercules had to clean the Augean stables. The stables were filled with an unimaginable amount of filth, so much so that no one had been able to clean them for years. But Hercules didn't just dive in with a shovel and a bucket. No, he figured out a clever way to divert the river Alpheus through the stables, washing away all the filth in one fell swoop. It's like trying to clean a room by blowing up the whole house with a vacuum, and yet, somehow, it works. Hercules' labor wasn't just about doing the impossible, it was about thinking his way out of a problem. And while some people might have looked at the task and thought, well, that's just a dirty job, Hercules made it look easy. But, of course, it wasn't easy. Each of the 12 labors required Herculean effort physically, mentally, and emotionally. The gods didn't make it easy for him. In fact, they sometimes threw him into situations where it felt like no matter what he did, he couldn't win. But what set Hercules apart wasn't just his strength or cleverness, but his determination. No matter how many times he stumbled, no matter how many traps the gods set for him, he got back up and kept moving forward. That's why he's still remembered as one of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology. But let's take a step back for a second and reflect on something that always makes me scratch my head. Was it really necessary for Hercules to perform these labors? I mean, he didn't exactly volunteer for this task. No, it was the gods who decided that his punishment for his earlier deeds was a lifetime of servitude and impossible feats. Some scholars still argue whether these labors were just a way for the gods to humble Hercules, or if they were a twisted test of his humanity. After all, he was a demigod, and the gods loved nothing more than putting their children through impossible tests. Was this some twisted form of divine entertainment, or was it a punishment for his very existence? There's a lot of debate on that, and even today, some people look at Hercules and wonder, why him? Why these tasks? It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, and that's part of what makes his story so tragic. Despite the trials, Hercules' journey isn't just about overcoming the odds, it's about the choices he made along the way. He could have refused the tasks. He could have chosen to walk away, to live a quiet life away from the gods and their constant meddling, but he didn't. Hercules faced each task head-on, not because he had to, but because, deep down, he knew. It was the only way to prove his worth. And even after he completed the labors, his trials didn't stop there. His life continued to be filled with challenges, his path always twisting in ways he couldn't control. In the end, Hercules' story wasn't just about slaying monsters or completing impossible feats. It was about a man who kept going, even when the gods themselves seemed intent on breaking him. That's the heart of his story. Perseverance. In the face of the gods' cruel games, strength despite the odds, and a hero's journey that never truly ends. But perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: no matter how impossible the task, or how brutal the challenge, Hercules teaches us that if we just keep going, if we keep fighting, there's nothing we can't overcome. You walk through a dimly lit realm now, and the air seems to shift around you. There's a sense of heaviness in the atmosphere, as if you've entered a world that's neither here nor there, somewhere between the living and the dead. This place, the underworld, is where Persephone, the goddess of spring, was taken. Her story is more than just a tale of abduction. It's one that intertwines the cycles of nature with the complex dynamics of love, loss, and eventual transformation. Persephone's descent into the underworld is, at first glance, a tragic story, but it's also one that carries deep symbolism. You can almost feel the pull of the dark, mysterious world below as you imagine her journey. You probably won't survive this tale either, but perhaps that's the way of things. In the realm of the gods, nothing is simple, and everything is filled with change. So, before you settle into the deeper shadows of this journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. Comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is, because this tale isn't just a myth, it's an invitation into a world of contrasts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and fertility. Persephone herself was a young goddess of beauty and blossoming life, the kind of deity who brought joy to the earth, making it bloom with flowers and fruit. She spent her days dancing in the meadows, her laughter echoing through the fields as she wandered in nature's embrace. But one fateful day, while picking flowers in a meadow, Persephone's life took a sharp turn. It was there that she first caught the eye of Hades, the god of the underworld. Hades, who ruled over the dead, was often depicted as a dark and brooding god, not the type who would go out and woo someone in broad daylight. But love, or perhaps something darker, drove him to act. In a sudden and violent twist, Hades emerged from the earth, riding his chariot pulled by black horses, and abducted Persephone. The earth shook beneath her, and before anyone could stop him, Hades took her down into his shadowy realm. Imagine the shock of the earth itself. The flowers that had bloomed moments ago withered, and the world seemed to grow colder in an instant. Persephone's mother, Demeter, was devastated. She searched frantically for her daughter, weeping and calling her name, but the earth remained silent. Some scholars still debate whether Hades was truly in love with Persephone, or if he simply took her as a way to control the cycles of life and death. Was this an act of love, or was it a calculated move to secure his throne in the underworld? Either way, Persephone's fate was sealed in the underworld. Persephone was no longer the carefree goddess she had once been. She was now the queen of the dead, ruler alongside Hades, and forced into a position she hadn't chosen. Her life, once filled with flowers and sunshine, was now spent in a dark and cold realm, surrounded by souls who had passed from the mortal world. But, as with all things in mythology, there's always more than one side to a story. Some versions of the myth suggest that, while Persephone initially resisted her fate, she eventually became accustomed to her role. In time, she even grew fond of her new position and the power that came with it. Was this a transformation she chose, or one that was thrust upon her? Some scholars argue that Persephone's descent into the underworld represents the cycles of life itself, how we all must eventually face death, and how, in that facing, we can sometimes grow. Others suggest that Persephone's experience in the underworld was one of pure subjugation, her power stripped from her. Perhaps, they say, the underworld was a place of darkness, not just physically, but metaphorically representing the loss of innocence, the loss of agency. In the myths, it's said that Persephone would spend half the year in the underworld and the other half with her mother, Demeter. This division of time became the basis for the seasons. When Persephone returned to the earth, the flowers would bloom, the crops would grow, and life would be reborn. But when she returned to the underworld, the world would grow cold, and the harvest would cease. the change in the Earth's seasons mirrored Persephone's journey. And with each return, she became more than just a goddess of spring. She became a symbol of life, death, and rebirth. But what does this mean for us? Why does Persephone's story still resonate so deeply, even today? In many ways, her story is a reflection of the cycles we all go through: periods of joy, growth, and vitality, followed by moments of darkness and transformation. It's the idea that life is a continuous cycle, one where we all must face moments of struggle, but that these struggles often lead to renewal. It's like the changing of the seasons. One moment, the sun is shining and the flowers are blooming, and the next, the leaves are falling and the cold winds are blowing. But just as winter eventually gives way to spring, so too does the darkness of our lives make way for moments of light. Persephone's journey, in a way, mirrors the internal transformations we all go through. Those moments when we descend into our own personal underworlds, only to emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable of appreciating the beauty around us. And let's not forget the ultimate twist in this myth. Persephone, despite being abducted, despite being forced into the underworld, ultimately has the power to transform the world around her. She doesn't just survive her time in the underworld. She becomes a ruler in her own right, one who brings the seasons to the earth. It's as if, in her darkest hour, she found the power to change the very fabric of the world itself. And in that, there's something deeply empowering. Persephone may have started her journey as a victim of Hades' desire, but by the end, she had become a queen, a goddess who wielded immense power. She wasn't just the goddess of spring. She was the keeper of the cycles of life and death, and through her, the earth itself was renewed. Some scholars still argue about the meaning behind Persephone's transformation. Was it an act of rebellion, a symbol of acceptance, or perhaps a bit of both? The more you think about it, the more you realize how many layers there are to her story. She wasn't simply a victim. She wasn't just a passive figure, swept away by the whims of the gods. No, Persephone became something more. She became a force of nature, a symbol of how we, too, can find our strength even in the most unlikely places. The underworld may have taken her, but in the end, Persephone's story was one of ultimate power and transformation. She shows us that even when we feel lost in darkness, we have the ability to emerge, stronger than before, ready to bring new life to the world. Persephone didn't just represent the seasons. She represented all the transitions in life, the hard moments, the painful ones, the dark periods, and how they all inevitably give way to something brighter, something better. Now, the air grows thick, as if you're about to step into a world where music itself holds the power to bend reality. You wander along, entranced by the haunting, ethereal melody that seems to echo in the distance. It's the music of Orpheus, the legendary musician whose song could charm even the stones, soften the hearts of wild beasts, and make the trees sway in rhythm. Orpheus's music was so powerful that even the gods themselves were moved by it. His talents were unmatched, and his ability to bring beauty and peace to the world around him was unparalleled. But, like all great myths, his story isn't as simple as it seems. It's one of love, loss, and the cruel consequences of fate, a tale so tragic that it echoes through time. You probably won't survive this story either, but then again, that's the fate of those who tread too closely to the divine. Before you continue on this path, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. Comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how these stories reach different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Orpheus's story begins with his gift. Music that could soothe the wildest storm and stir the hearts of both mortals and immortals. Son of Apollo, the god of music, and Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, Orpheus was born with the perfect union of talent and divine inspiration. His lyre was a gift from his father, and when he played it, the sound was like nothing anyone had ever heard before. Birds would stop to listen, rivers would slow, and the very earth seemed to be at peace. He was more than just a musician. Orpheus's music had the power to change the very world around him. But, as with all stories of great power, there's always something to balance it. Orpheus's downfall began when he fell in love with Eurydice, a beautiful nymph. Their love was immediate, a perfect harmony, as if the music of the heavens had played just for them. But, like most myths, this story doesn't come without its twists. On the day of their wedding, tragedy struck. Eurydice, dancing in the meadows, was bitten by a snake, and just like that, she was gone, taken to the underworld. Orpheus's music, which had once brought peace to the earth, now became the vehicle for his heartache. He poured all his grief into his lyre, and in his sorrow, he decided to descend to the underworld to reclaim his love, with nothing but his music. Orpheus traveled to the land of the dead, where few mortals dared to tread. There, he stood before Hades and Persephone, and with his lyre, he played the most mournful, beautiful melody they had ever heard. The music was so beautiful that even the stern ruler of the underworld, Hades, could not resist. He agreed to let Eurydice return to the world of the living, but there was one condition. Orpheus must not look back at her until they both had reached the surface. A simple request, or so it seemed. Orpheus, driven by love and hope, agreed to the terms. As they ascended, with the light of the living world growing nearer, a terrible doubt began to rise in Orpheus's heart. Was Eurydice really behind him? He couldn't hear her footsteps, only his own. The silence was unbearable. It was as if the world itself held its breath, and in that moment of doubt, Orpheus turned, and in that instant, Eurydice vanished, lost to him forever. Some scholars still debate the meaning of Orpheus's fatal glance. Was it a moment of human weakness, a slip of the heart in the face of uncertainty, or was it a cruel twist of fate? Was it destiny that Orpheus would lose Eurydice a second time, or was it his own inability to trust in the gods' promises? Perhaps it's a little of both. The gods, it seems, enjoyed toying with Orpheus, testing his limits as they do with all their favorites. Even in the face of tragedy, Orpheus could not escape the whims of the divine. But there's something beautiful in the sorrow of this myth, something that speaks to the human condition. Orpheus's failure to trust, his inability to leave behind the world of the dead, is something we all face in one form or another. How often do we find ourselves looking back, second-guessing our decisions, or doubting the promises we've made? Orpheus's tragic flaw isn't that he looked back. It's that he couldn't let go of his love, of his grief, of the past, after his second loss. Orpheus became a figure of mourning and music. He swore off the love of women, turning to his music alone. But the gods, always keen on ensuring their toys are well played, didn't let him rest for long. Orpheus's rejection of love led him to become something of an outcast. The Maenads, followers of Dionysus, enraged by Orpheus's disavowal of love, tore him apart, his head and lyre floating down the river as the last echoes of his song drifted into the night. His tragic end is a reflection of the harshness of the gods. Even a figure as powerful as Orpheus couldn't escape their whims. He was a godlike musician, a man capable of charming anyone and anything. But in the end, his fatal flaw was something entirely human: doubt, mistrust, and the inability to let go. Yet, there's an interesting twist in Orpheus's fate. After his death, his head and lyre were said to continue to sing, floating in the river, their mournful music still captivating those who pass by. In death, Orpheus's music was more powerful than it ever was in life. Some scholars argue that this reflects the idea that, sometimes, our greatest contributions are made after we're gone. That the true legacy of Orpheus was not the life he led, but the songs he left behind, a perfect, unbroken melody of love, loss, and sorrow. In a way, his music continued to live on, long after his body had been torn apart. Perhaps that's the greatest irony of Orpheus's myth, that despite losing everything, he never stopped playing, even in death. His music was never silenced, and it was through his death that he became immortal, his melodies echoing forever in the hearts of all who heard them. Orpheus's story is one of the most tragic, yet profoundly beautiful, in Greek mythology. It speaks to the nature of love, the inevitability of loss, and the consequences of doubt. His myth isn't just about the power of music, but the fragility of human emotions. Orpheus could move mountains with his music, yet he couldn't move past his own fears. He couldn't let go, and in that inability, he lost everything. But in his loss, Orpheus became more than just a tragic figure. He became a symbol of the eternal nature of love, grief, and the music that lives on long after the player has gone. The air is thick with anticipation as you stand before the great walls of Troy, peering at the mighty city that's been the site of one of the greatest and most cunning tricks in all of mythological history. You've heard the story countless times of the Greeks who, unable to breach the city after 10 long years of war, devised a plan so clever that it would forever change the way we think about warfare, deception, and strategy. It was the Trojan horse, a masterpiece of trickery, a plan so audacious that it almost seems too good to be true. And as you stand there, the dust from the long battle still in the air, you realize that this wasn't just a victory for the Greeks. It was a moment of pure genius, cloaked in the shadow of a devastating loss. You probably won't survive this one either, but that's the cost of venturing too close to the gods' games. So, before you settle deeper into this tale of deceit and glory, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And don't forget to comment where you're listening from and what time it is, because these stories always travel farther than we expect. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of the Trojan horse begins in the aftermath of a 10-year-long war between the Greeks and the Trojans. The war, sparked by the abduction of Helen of Troy by Paris, had stretched on for so long that both sides had grown weary, yet neither could claim victory. The Greeks had laid siege to the city, and the Trojans, fiercely defending their home, had held them at bay. For a decade, the great walls of Troy had withstood every attempt to breach them. The city seemed impenetrable, and the Greeks were running out of options. It's in this moment of desperation that Odysseus, the king of Ithaca and known for his cunning and intellect, conceived a plan so brilliant that it would make even the gods sit up and take notice. The Greeks would build a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to hold a small group of their finest warriors. This horse, crafted with such skill and grandeur, would be left outside the gates of Troy as a supposed gift, a symbol of their departure after 10 years of fruitless siege. The Greeks would then sail away, making it seem as if they had given up and were leaving. In truth, they were hiding inside the horse, waiting for nightfall. When the Trojans brought the horse into the city as a trophy, believing they had won, the Greek warriors would emerge, opening the gates to the rest of the Greek army, which would return under cover of darkness and defeat the unsuspecting Trojans. It was the perfect planner mix of psychological warfare, deception, and strategy. But here's the twist: the Trojans, in their celebratory mood after what they believed was the end of the war, made the fateful decision to bring the horse inside the city gates. Their priest, Laocoon, tried to warn them. He cried out, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." But the Trojans, in their excitement and exhaustion, ignored his warnings. In one of the most famous moments in mythology, and his sons were devoured by serpents sent by Poseidon, and his warning was lost to the sands of time. With no one left to caution them, the Trojans carried the horse into the heart of their city. They feasted and celebrated that night, oblivious to the danger that lay beneath their feet. Some scholars still argue about whether the Trojans were truly foolish, or if they were simply the victims of an incredibly well-executed plot. Was their downfall inevitable? Could they have seen through the deception? Or was this the ultimate symbol of the gods' will, shaping the fate of mortals in the most cunning and cruel of ways? That night, as the Trojans slept, the Greek warriors emerged from the horse and opened the city gates. The Greek army, having secretly sailed back to the shores of Troy under the cover of darkness, stormed the city. It didn't take long for the once proud city to fall, and Troy was razed to the ground. The Trojans, caught completely off guard, were slaughtered in the streets, and their once mighty walls crumbled. The victory was swift, but it came at a great cost. The Greeks had won, but at what price? The Trojan horse, once a symbol of the Greeks' defeat, had become a symbol of their cunning and their ability to manipulate their enemies. It wasn't just a physical object, it was a psychological weapon, a brilliant play of trust and betrayal. The Trojans had been so certain of their victory that they failed to see the trap right in front of them. It's almost as if they were blinded by their own sense of security, a common theme in many myths where hubris leads to downfall. Some argue that this moment, the introduction of the Trojan horse, was more than just a story of war. It was a reflection on the nature of human pride and the dangerous consequences of underestimating your enemy. After all, the Greeks weren't just fighting against the Trojans, they were fighting against fate itself. As the Greek soldiers poured into the city, and the fires of Troy began to burn, the gods' role in the fall of the city became undeniable. The Greeks had been guided and protected by their own gods, while the Trojans had been abandoned by theirs. The gods, it seemed, had chosen their side, and it was only a matter of time before the mortals would feel the full force of divine intervention. The Trojans had once been blessed with a strong defense, but the gods were fickle, and their favor could shift in an instant. The fall of Troy was a testament to the gods' capricious nature and how the fortunes of mortals could change in a heartbeat. Was the Trojan horse merely the final piece in a puzzle that had already been set in motion by the gods, or was it a human endeavor that had outsmarted the divine? Scholars have debated this for centuries. Some suggest that the gods were the true architects of the fall, with the Trojan horse merely a tool in their hands. Others argue that the Trojans' inability to see the signs of danger was their own fault, a result of their own arrogance and overconfidence. The story of the Trojan horse is a story of deception. Yes, but it's also a story of fate, hubris, and the ultimate price of victory. The Greeks, for all their cunning, were not without their own flaws, and the Trojan horse, while a masterstroke of strategy, also came with its own set of consequences. The war, though over, would leave lasting scars. The Greeks would eventually return home, but not without their own hardships. The Trojan horse, that giant wooden structure that stood as a symbol of trickery and triumph, would forever be remembered as a brilliant yet heartbreaking strategy, one that led to both the fall of a great city and the devastation of its conquerors. It's a reminder that even the most clever plans can have unintended consequences, and sometimes, in winning, we lose more than we bargained for. The wind seems to pick up as you walk, the cold breeze brushing past your skin. You feel the pull of the sky above, where the sun is bright and unforgiving. Your journey now takes you to the myth of Icarus, a story that both excites and terrifies you as you realize that sometimes the sky itself can be as dangerous as it is beautiful. Icarus, with his wings of wax and feathers, soared to heights where even the gods themselves feared to tread. But with that beauty came tragedy. You see, in the world of the gods, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Icarus's flight wasn't just a tale of ambition. It was a lesson on hubris and the dangers of overreaching. You probably won't survive this myth either, but that's the way of the gods, always testing, always pushing the limits. So, before you dive into this story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And don't forget to comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where these tales land. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, the master craftsman and inventor, who had been called upon by King Minos of Crete to build the labyrinth. The labyrinth was a maze so intricate that even Daedalus himself could barely find his way out. It was here that Minos imprisoned the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature that terrorized the island. After completing this daunting task, Daedalus became a prisoner of King Minos himself, locked away in a tower to ensure that no one would ever replicate his brilliant designs. In his captivity, Daedalus devised a plan to escape, but his idea was more audacious than anyone could have imagined. He would build wings for himself and his son, Icarus, using feathers and wax. It wasn't just a flight of fancy, it was a literal flight. Daedalus, known for his unparalleled skill and intelligence, crafted wings that could carry them both across the sky. Escaping the tyranny of King Minos, they would soar like birds, freed from the earth's constraints. Daedalus warned his son to fly neither too high, where the sun could melt the wax, nor too low, where the sea's dampness could weigh down the wings. But what is a warning to a young man full of ambition, vitality, and dreams of greatness? Icarus, full of youthful enthusiasm and blinded by the thrill of flight, could not resist the allure of the sky. As they took off, Daedalus soared at a steady pace, but Icarus, he couldn't help himself. The wind beneath his wings was exhilarating, and the sky above was endless. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating, and it didn't take long for Icarus to ignore his father's warnings. He flew higher and higher, climbing toward the sun, his wings catching the warm rays, his heart racing with excitement. The further he flew, the more beautiful the world seemed, and the more invincible he felt. Surely, he thought, the sky was his to conquer. But as he soared too close to the sun, the wax that held his wings together began to melt. Slowly at first, and then all at once, his wings began to disintegrate. Panicked, Icarus tried to steady himself, but it was too late. The wings broke apart, and with nothing but the vast expanse of the ocean below, Icarus fell plummeting into the sea, never to rise again. Icarus's fall is one of the most tragic moments in Greek mythology. His ambition, his yearning to reach the impossible heights of the gods led him to his doom. It wasn't the first time someone had fallen due to excessive pride, and it wouldn't be the last. Some scholars still argue whether Icarus was truly to blame for his downfall, or if it was fate that guided him to his tragic end. Was it his youthful recklessness, or was it the flaw in his father's plan? After all, Daedalus had warned him, but did the wings, so beautiful and powerful, ignite something deeper in Icarus, desire not to simply escape, but to prove something? The myth of Icarus is often seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition and the human desire to transcend limitations. In Greek mythology, hubris, the excessive pride or self-confidence that leads to defiance of the gods, is always met with a fall. Icarus's flight, like so many others before him, represents the drive to reach beyond one's station, to push boundaries, and to take on the gods themselves. But, as the myth shows, there are consequences for flying too close to the sun. But here's the thing. Despite the tragic end of Icarus, the myth isn't just about failure. It's about the inevitable desire to reach higher, to break free from the chains of mortality. The flight of Icarus represents that part of us, all the part that dreams of greatness, that wants to push beyond the limits of what is possible. Icarus's fall is tragic, yes, but it's also inspiring. It speaks to the human condition, to our constant striving for more, even when we know the risks. The very fact that he flew so high-reaching beyond his father's careful instructions speaks to a universal longing. How many times in our own lives have we been faced with a choice, a moment where the world seems to open up before us, and we want to grasp it all? And how often do we ignore the warnings, believing that this time will be different, that we can escape the consequences? In some ways, Icarus is the embodiment of youth itself, carefree, daring, and at times, reckless. His ambition to fly to such heights may seem foolish, but it's also the very quality that drives progress, innovation, and discovery. Think of the great pioneers, the artists, the dreamers, the ones who dared to push past the boundaries of what was known. They too have faced the perilous path of ambition. Some have soared, some have fallen. Icarus's tragedy is not just a warning about the dangers of pride. It's also a reflection of the price we pay for attempting greatness. Without the possibility of failure, there is no real chance of success. Icarus's story, in its bittersweet sorrow, is a testament to the eternal human struggle, the struggle to achieve, to break free, and sometimes to fall. The myth of Icarus, while tragic, also serves as a reminder of the limits that exist within us all. It tells us that while ambition can be a beautiful and powerful thing, it must be tempered with wisdom. Flying too high without regard for the consequences leads to disaster, but a life without reaching for the stars is one without progress. Icarus's wings may have melted under the sun, but his story has endured for centuries as a symbol of both the fragility and the brilliance of the human spirit. In the end, we all must find balance between striving for greatness and knowing our limits. Icarus's fall wasn't just the end of a dream, it was the beginning of a myth that still resonates with us today, reminding us that while the sky may be limitless, our reach should be guided by the wisdom of those who came before us. The story shifts now, taking you to a land where everything is gold, but nothing is ever quite as valuable as it seems. You find yourself standing before King Midas, whose name has become synonymous with the very concept of wealth. But you sense that, even in his gilded halls, there's a hollowness that can't be filled. King Midas, for all his riches, was not content. He had everything: power, wealth, and fame, but his insatiable greed led him to make a wish that would ultimately turn his life into a golden prison. You see, in the world of the gods, the quest for more is often met with unexpected consequences. You probably won't survive this tale either, but that's the price we pay when we reach too far. So, before you continue into this story of riches and ruin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And if you're feeling brave, comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. This story travels well across the ages. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. King Midas, as the story goes, was a ruler of vast wealth, his kingdom shining with gold. He had everything anyone could wish for: mountains of gold, riches beyond measure, and the power to command his subjects. Yet, for all his grandeur, Midas wasn't satisfied. It was said that he loved gold more than anything else in the world, and no amount of riches could ever satisfy his craving. One day, as if to test the limits of his desire, Midas encountered Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, who had been wandering through his land. As a gift for his hospitality, Dionysus offered Midas one wish: anything his heart desired. The king, blinded by his greed, did not hesitate for a moment. He immediately wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. The request was simple enough, yet it was a wish that would bring about his ultimate downfall. At first, Midas was overjoyed by his newfound power. He touched objects, and they immediately turned into solid gold: flowers, trees, stones, and even food. His palace became a glittering shrine to his greed, a place of opulence and excess. But as he reveled in his riches, he quickly realized that his wish had come with a dark twist. When Midas touched his food, it turned to gold, and he could no longer eat. The once tender fruits and delicate meals now became hard, inedible statues of gold. His joy turned to despair as he found that he could no longer drink the wine he so loved. His own servants and family members, caught in the trap of his greed, soon became victims of his touch, turning to lifeless golden statues with every embrace. It's as though, in his insatiable desire to possess everything, Midas had become blind to the true cost of his wish. Some scholars still argue whether Midas's greed was his ultimate downfall, or if the gods had a hand in turning his desire for gold into a curse. Was Midas's fate sealed by his own flaw, or was it a punishment designed by the gods themselves to teach him a lesson? But Midas's tale isn't merely one of tragedy, it's a story with a twist of redemption. In the depths of his despair, realizing that he had turned his daughter, the one person he loved more than anything, into a golden statue, Midas begged Dionysus to take back his gift. The god, seeing the king's remorse, granted him mercy. Dionysus instructed Midas to wash in the river Pactolus, to rid himself of the golden touch. As he did, the golden power flowed from him, and the river's sands became rich with gold. In that moment, Midas learned the harshest of lessons. The things we desire most can often be the very things that destroy us. It's as though his greed had turned him into a prisoner of his own making, and only by giving up his craving for gold did he find his way back to the world of the living. The myth of King Midas is a perfect reflection of the human condition. In our pursuit of wealth and power, we can lose sight of what truly matters. It serves as a warning. What we think we want most in life might not be the thing that brings us true happiness. But let's pause for a moment and consider the deeper meaning behind Midas's golden touch. Was it really the gold that was the problem, or was it Midas's obsession with it? The gods didn't grant him the power to turn things to gold because they hated him. They did it because they wanted him to understand the price of unchecked desire. The gods in Greek mythology were often depicted as playing games with mortals, giving them powers or gifts that seemed like blessings but were, in reality, tests. In Midas's case, the test was simple. His wish was granted. But the gold, as beautiful as it was, could never feed him, could never nurture him, could never bring him what he truly needed. And that's the real tragedy of his story, Midas's. Greed led him to mistake wealth for happiness, and in doing so, he lost everything that truly mattered. The golden touch wasn't just a curse because it turned things into gold. It was a curse because it made Midas forget the things that were truly worth cherishing. It's also interesting to note that Midas's wish wasn't completely disastrous. There was a twist in the tale. The river Pactolus, which flowed with the gold he washed away, became rich with the same gold that had once turned everything it touched into a curse. In a strange way, the story of Midas became one of balance. Gold, once a symbol of destruction, turned into a symbol of wealth and prosperity for others. Some scholars suggest that this is a reflection of how we, as humans, often need to experience loss or hardship before we can truly understand the value of what we have. Midas learned his lesson the hard way, but in the end, he found redemption not just through his own transformation, but through the transformation of the world around him. And perhaps the most interesting aspect of Midas's story is the question of whether or not he truly learned his lesson. After his redemption, Midas's life did not suddenly become perfect. He had to deal with the consequences of his actions, and while he gained wisdom from his experience, the question remains, did he truly give up his desire for gold? Some versions of the myth suggest that Midas, though granted his wish for a second time, never again sought gold with the same insatiable hunger. Others imply that his experience in the river was enough to transform him into a more moderate man, someone who understood that wealth, when sought after excessively, could be as hollow as the gold he once craved. But whatever the case may be, Midas's story stands as a timeless reminder. Wealth without wisdom is a hollow pursuit. And sometimes, what we think we want most in life is the very thing that will leave us empty. The myth of King Midas resonates, because it speaks to something deep within us, or the longing for more. The constant chase for something we believe will bring us happiness. Yet, as Midas learned the hard way, it's not always the gold that matters. Sometimes, it's the relationships, the moments of love, and the things money can't buy that are the most valuable. As you continue your journey, the air grows heavier with tension, as if you're stepping into a world where the very fabric of reality is about to unravel. You've heard the tale of Arachne before, but you may not have known just how deeply. Her story is tied to the gods' complex web of jealousy, pride, and transformation. Arachne, once a mortal weaver of unparalleled skill, found herself caught in the crosshairs of a god's vanity. Her story is a tragic one, woven with the threads of ambition and consequence, a tale where beauty and talent meet a cruel fate. You probably won't survive this one either. But that's the nature of the myths. Beautiful, tragic, and often with a twist you never saw coming. So, before you step into this dark corner of the mythological world, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is this tale. Much like Arachne's fate, seems to reach across time and space. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. Hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Arachne was no ordinary mortal. She was a weaver, one of the best the world had ever seen. Her tapestries were so intricate and beautiful that people from all over would come to admire her skill. She wove scenes of such detail that they seemed almost alive, the colors rich and vibrant, the stories captured in every thread. Arachne's fame spread far and wide, and soon her skill became the talk of the town. But there was one problem. Arachne had an arrogance to match her talent. She boasted openly that her work was superior to that of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and craft. "My skill surpasses even that of the gods," she claimed, and her words reached the ears of Athena herself. Now, Athena was not one to take insults lightly, especially when it came to her craft. She was a goddess known for her wisdom and artistic skill, and hearing a mortal challenge her superiority was more than she could bear. In a fit of rage and jealousy, Athena decided to meet Arachne in a contest of weaving. The stakes were high. If Arachne lost, she would face the gods' punishment. If she won, she would gain a divine status in her craft. It was, in essence, a challenge that had the potential to elevate Arachne to godlike status or doom her to an unimaginable fate. The weaving contest began, and as you might expect, the tension was palpable. Athena, with all her divine knowledge and skill, began to weave a tapestry depicting the gods' greatest feats, each scene full of grandeur and power. Her work was flawless, every thread precise, every design a tribute to the gods themselves. But Arachne, with her mortal hands, did not falter. She wove a tapestry that depicted the gods not as flawless beings, but as petty, vengeful, and capricious, mocking the divine in a way that no mortal had ever dared before. Her masterpiece was so stunning, so full of truth and defiance, that it shocked even Athena. The gods in Arachne's work weren't omnipotent or divine. They were shown in their more foolish, human-like forms, their flaws laid bare for all to see. Some scholars still argue whether Arachne's depiction of the gods was an act of bravery, or if it was an insult too far. Was Arachne's work simply a reflection of the gods' imperfections, or was it a deliberate slap in the face of the very beings who controlled her fate? In any case, Athena was enraged. The contest had not gone the way she had hoped. Arachne had not only matched her skill, but had done so in a way that mocked the gods themselves. Furious, Athena could not accept the challenge being lost to a mortal. In a moment of divine wrath, she decided to punish Arachne, not for her skill, but for her audacity. The goddess transformed Arachne into a spider, cursed to weave forever, but now in a form that would forever be associated with death and decay. Arachne's human form was gone, replaced by the eight-legged creature we now call a spider. Her curse was not just to weave, but to weave in darkness, alone, for all eternity. Some scholars still debate the true nature of Arachne's punishment. Was it a punishment for her arrogance, or was it a reflection of Athena's own insecurities? Did Athena see in Arachne's talent a threat to her own divine power, and did she respond out of fear? The transformation into a spider, while terrifying, can also be seen as a reflection of Arachne's endless drive to create. Arachne's weaving became eternal, as she was forced to continue creating, trapped in the form of a creature that could only make webs, never to experience the joy of creating something that could be admired again. And here's where the story takes another twist. In the end, Arachne's punishment became her redemption. She became the spider, yes, but in that form, she achieved what she had always longed for: immortality. Her craft, once tied to a mortal body, was now an eternal part of the natural world. Spiders, small as they may seem, are known for their intricate webs that span across corners and walls, each one a work of delicate craftsmanship. Arachne's art, once bound to the mortal realm, had transcended time itself, becoming part of nature's design. Some versions of the myth suggest that Arachne, despite her punishment, found a kind of freedom in her new form. She no longer had to answer to the gods, no longer had to worry about the fickle nature of divine approval. Instead, she wove in the shadows, creating beauty without the need for validation. In some ways, Arachne's transformation is a reflection of how, in the pursuit of perfection, we can lose sight of what truly matters. Arachne's ambition and pride led to her downfall, but in her fall, she found a new form of existence, one that allowed her to continue her craft for all eternity. It's as if her punishment was, in some strange way, a form of immortality. Arachne, now a spider, continued her work, no longer bound by the limitations of the human form. Some scholars still argue whether Arachne's punishment was just, or if it was simply the gods' way of punishing those who dare challenge their power. Was it Arachne's arrogance that led to her downfall, or was it the gods' need to control those who, like her, were gifted with exceptional skill? Either way, Arachne's story remains a poignant reminder that pride, though often rewarded in the mortal world, can come at a heavy cost in the divine realm. In the end, Arachne's myth teaches us about the dangers of hubris, but it also reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit. Though she was transformed into a creature of darkness and isolation, Arachne's craft never died. She continued to weave, to create, to leave behind a legacy that would last forever. In a way, her transformation was both a punishment and a blessing, a reflection of how our greatest flaws can sometimes become the source of our greatest strength. And so, in the quiet corners of the world, where the spider weaves its web, there is a trace of Arachne's spirit still lingering eternally, creating, eternally weaving, and forever remembered. As you journey deeper into the shadows of mythology, you find yourself standing at the edge of a pool, its surface shimmering in the soft light. There, reflecting back at you, is the figure of Narcissus, a young man so entranced by his own beauty that he became trapped in his own reflection. His story, so well known yet so fraught with tragedy, speaks to the dangers of vanity, obsession, and the way self-love can transform into self-destruction. Narcissus was no ordinary mortal. He was the epitome of beauty, so breathtakingly handsome that even the gods couldn't resist gazing at him. Yet, his beauty was not the cause of his downfall. No, Narcissus's greatest flaw was his inability to see beyond himself. His inability to love anything other than the image reflected back at him. You probably won't survive this myth either, but then again, many who tread too closely to the gods' games find themselves lost in their own reflection. Before you dive into this story of beauty and ruin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And if you're feeling bold, Comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always curious to see where these myths make their way. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Narcissus's tale begins in the lush forests of ancient Greece, where his beauty was known far and wide. His physical appearance was so stunning that it was said to surpass all others, mortal and divine alike. The nymph Echo, who roamed the forests, was captivated by Narcissus from the moment she laid eyes on him. But unlike most mortals, Narcissus was not easily swayed by the affections of others. He was distant, impervious to the charms of those who sought his love, and this was where his fatal flaw took root. Narcissus had no interest in love, no interest in others, and especially no interest in the nymphs who found themselves falling. For him, his heart was completely consumed by his own image. Echo, enchanted by him, pursued him relentlessly, but Narcissus, unable to return her affection, rejected her cruelly. In her despair, Echo faded away, her voice the only thing left of her, repeating the last words of those who spoke to her. But Echo's sorrow wasn't the only consequence of Narcissus's vanity. The goddess Nemesis, the personification of retribution, took notice of Narcissus's behavior and decided to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Nemesis led Narcissus to a pool of water, and there, for the first time, Narcissus caught sight of his own reflection. He was struck speechless by his own beauty, staring at the image before him with awe and desire. He leaned in closer, trying to kiss the reflection, but it was no use. It was only an image, and no matter how much he desired it, he could never possess it. Narcissus became obsessed. He refused to leave the water, entranced by the reflection that held him captive. He gazed at it day and night, unable to tear himself away. He didn't eat or drink, he simply stared. Narcissus's love for his reflection was so intense that it consumed him entirely, and eventually he withered away, dying by the very pool where he had first seen his reflection. Some versions of the myth suggest that Narcissus, in his obsession, realized too late that the reflection was not a real person, and in his grief, he died. Others claimed that he simply couldn't tear himself away, succumbing to his own inability to let go of his image. Either way, Narcissus's end was a tragic one, and his name became synonymous with love, taken to destructive extremes. Some scholars still debate the meaning of Narcissus's downfall. Was it a punishment for his arrogance and rejection of others, or was it a commentary on the nature of vanity itself? Narcissus's inability to love anything other than himself reflects the dangers of excessive self-obsession. His tragic end warns against becoming so enamored with our own image, with our own desires, that we lose sight of the world around us. There's an element of irony in Narcissus's story. He loved only what he could never have, and in that love, he lost everything. Some interpret the myth as a cautionary tale about the dangers of narcissism, a mental state that can alienate us from others and lead us to self-destruction. Narcissus, in his pursuit of perfection, found nothing but emptiness. His beauty, rather than being a blessing, became his undoing. In his desire to possess an idealized version of love, he ultimately lost his life. The myth reminds us that love, when directed inward and without balance, can be all-consuming, leading to a life that is both unfulfilled and isolated. But there is another layer to the story of Narcissus that's worth exploring. In some versions of the myth, Narcissus's death is not just the end of his life, is the beginning of something new. Where he died, a flower bloomed, the Narcissus flower, which we now call the daffodil. This flower, it's said, sprang up where Narcissus had perished, a symbol of his beauty, his obsession, and his tragic end. The flower, delicate and beautiful, serves as a reminder that while Narcissus's obsession with his own reflection was his downfall, it also left behind something lasting, something beautiful, though tinged with sorrow. In this way, the myth of Narcissus takes on a more complex meaning. While his obsession with himself led to death, it also gave birth to a new form of life, a symbol of both his flaw and his legacy. The Narcissus flower became a symbol of beauty, yes, but also of vanity and self-destruction. A constant reminder that what is most captivating can sometimes be the very thing that brings our downfall. This duality in the myth of Narcissus is what makes it so powerful. On the surface, it's a simple story about the dangers of vanity. But beneath that lies a deeper message about the complexity of love, self-acceptance, and the price of obsession. Narcissus's story asks us to consider where we draw the line between self-love and narcissism. At what point does admiration for ourselves become destructive? It's a question that resonates in the modern world as much as it did in ancient Greece. In a world where self-image is constantly reflected in the media, in social platforms, and in our own mirrors, Narcissus's tale serves as both a warning and a reflection. It reminds us that, while it's important to love ourselves, it's equally important to look beyond ourselves, to engage with the world and the people around us, lest we become trapped in the same cycle of obsession that led Narcissus to his tragic end. And so, as you step away from the pool and continue your journey, the myth of Narcissus lingers in your thoughts. The story, though ancient, speaks to something timeless in the human condition. It reminds us that while beauty and love are powerful forces, they are most potent when shared and balanced. Narcissus, in his isolation, found only despair, but in his story, we find a lesson. True fulfillment comes not from gazing endlessly at our own reflection, but from reaching out to the world around us, embracing the love and connections that give life its true meaning. The ground beneath your feet begins to tremble, as if the earth itself is quaking under the weight of a battle fought long ago. You step cautiously, aware that the story unfolding before you is not one of personal glory or love, but of cosmic conflict, a clash between the gods that nearly tore the heavens asunder. The Olympian War, fought between the gods of Olympus and the Titans who once ruled the world, is a story of power, betrayal, and the fundamental shift in the order of the universe. In this great battle, the very fabric of existence was at stake, and what followed would change the course of history forever. You probably won't survive this conflict either, but then again, wars fought by gods are never simple. And this one, like all mythic struggles, is both a lesson and a warning. So, before you step into the heart of the war, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And as always, feel free to comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's see just how far this ancient conflict still reaches today. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Olympian War was born out of the ancient conflict between the gods of Olympus and the Titans, the primordial beings who ruled the world before the rise of the Olympian gods. The Titans, led by the mighty Kronos, had long been in control, ruling the cosmos with an iron fist. However, Kronos, fearing a prophecy that foretold his own downfall at the hands of one of his children, took drastic measures to prevent this. He devoured each of his offspring as soon as they were born, ensuring that no one would challenge his rule. But his wife Rhea could not bear to see her children perish, and when the time came for the birth of their youngest son Zeus, she devised a clever plan. Instead of giving Kronos the newborn, Rhea gave him a rock wrapped in swaddling clothes. Kronos, fooled by the deception, swallowed the rock, believing it to be his son. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away and raised in secret, far from the reach of his father's deadly grasp. As he grew, Zeus learned of his true heritage and the fate that awaited him. He was destined to overthrow Kronos and free his siblings from their father's stomach. When Zeus came of age, he returned to confront his father, and with the help of his mother, Rhea, he tricked Kronos into regurgitating the swallowed children. His siblings, Hestia, Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hades, emerged from Kronos' belly, and together they united against the Titans. This marked the beginning of the Olympian War, a battle that would shape the future of the gods and the world. What followed was a clash of unimaginable power. The Olympian gods, led by Zeus, faced off against the Titans in a battle that shook the foundations of the cosmos. The gods were aided by a number of powerful beings, including the Cyclopes, who forged Zeus's thunderbolts, and the Hecatonchires, hundred-handed giants who were freed from their imprisonment by the Titans. These monstrous beings joined the Olympians in their fight, tipping the scales in their favor. The war was fierce and long, with both sides suffering terrible losses. The Titans, with their immense strength, were formidable opponents, but the Olympian gods, fueled by their newfound unity and power, slowly began to gain the upper hand. The battle reached its climax when Zeus, with his thunderbolts, struck down Kronos, casting him into the deepest pit of Tartarus. With their leader defeated, the Titans were overthrown and imprisoned, their reign brought to a humiliating end. The Olympians, having triumphed, took their place as the new rulers of the cosmos, with Zeus ascending to the throne as the king of the gods. The victory was complete, but the war had left deep scars on both sides. The Titans, once mighty rulers, were now prisoners, locked away in the dark abyss of Tartarus, their power broken. The Olympian gods, though victorious, had to reckon with the consequences of their actions. Some scholars argue that the Olympian War was not just a battle for power, but a struggle to define the very nature of the gods themselves. Was the war simply a contest of strength and dominance, or was it a more profound shift in the order of the world, one that would set the stage for the conflicts that followed? But even as the Olympians took their place in the heavens, the war did not end. The Titans' defeat left behind a sense of unfinished business, and the gods of Olympus, though now in control, were not free from conflict. Zeus's rule was challenged not only by the remnants of the Titan forces, but by his own family, who, though victorious, could not always agree on how to rule. Poseidon and Hades, though allies in the war, each sought dominion over their own realms, and their ambitions would occasionally bring them into conflict with Zeus's authority. The Olympian War, while technically over, was just the beginning of a new era of divine tension and political intrigue. The gods, though supreme, were not immune to the same flaws that had once led to the fall of the Titans. In their pursuit of power and control, they found themselves embroiled in conflicts of their own making. Some scholars still debate whether the Olympian War was truly a battle for supremacy, or whether it was, in fact, a necessary transformation for the gods. Was the overthrow of the Titans a purely divine act of power, or was it a cosmic evolution, a shift in the very nature of existence? In overthrowing the Titans, the Olympians not only defeated their predecessors, but also took on a new role. They became not just gods of power, but also gods of balance and order. The Olympian War was not just a war of gods. It was a war that defined the relationship between power and responsibility. Zeus, though victorious, would come to learn that ruling the heavens required more than strength. It required wisdom, patience, and the ability to maintain order in a world that was always on the brink of chaos. The war, while ending with the Olympians' victory, ultimately marked the beginning of a new cycle of divine conflict. The gods of Olympus, now in control, would face challenges from within and without, as their power would be continually tested by both mortal and divine forces. The Olympian War was, in essence, a microcosm of the eternal struggle for dominance and balance that defines not only the world of the gods, but also the world of mortals. As Zeus took his place as king of the gods, he was reminded that no victory, no matter how grand, is ever truly final. In the divine world, power is always in flux, and the battle for control is a never-ending struggle. And so, as you stand in the aftermath of this great war, you realize that the Olympians' victory was not just a triumph of strength, but a reminder of the delicate balance between order and chaos. The gods may have defeated the Titans, but the true challenge was in keeping their reign intact, in maintaining the harmony of the cosmos. For even in victory, the gods of Olympus would forever be caught in a cycle of conflict, each new struggle shaping their destiny and the fate of the world itself. The night grows thicker around you as you find yourself standing on the deck of a ship, surrounded by a crew of brave adventurers. The salty breeze of the sea stings your face, and you can almost hear the creaking of the ship's wood as it cuts through the waves. Before you lies the legendary journey of Jason and the Argonauts, a story of heroes, quests, and the pursuit of glory. But this tale is more than just a quest for a golden fleece. It's a story of friendship, betrayal, and the harsh realities of pursuing the impossible. Jason, the son of Aison, was born into a destiny that no one could escape. His story is one of determination, but also one of the deep costs of ambition. You probably won't survive this journey either, but in a world like this, that's to be expected. So, before you step aboard the Argo and sail with the Argonauts, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And feel free to comment below where you're listening from, and what time it is. This journey, like the quest for the Golden Fleece, is one that can reach far and wide. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Jason's story begins with a prophecy, one that foretold that he would one day retrieve the Golden Fleece and restore his father's kingdom. His journey was not merely one of heroism. It was a mission that would take him across the seas, into lands unknown, and place him in the company of some of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology. The Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship and power, was guarded by a fierce dragon in the distant land of Colchis, and only the bravest would have the strength and will to claim it. Jason's quest was a dangerous one, but it wasn't one that he took on alone. To aid him, he gathered a group of the finest warriors, each one a hero in their own right. The Argonauts, as they came to be known, included Hercules, Atalanta, Orpheus, and many others, each with their own remarkable abilities. Together, they embarked on a journey that would test their courage, their loyalty, and their resolve. The quest for the Golden Fleece was no simple feat. The journey was fraught with trials, many of which seemed insurmountable. One of the earliest Challenges the Argonauts faced came when they were forced to sail through the clashing rocks, the Symplegades, which would crush anything that passed between them. The heroes, knowing they couldn't pass through by force, relied on the guidance of the gods. It was Hera, the queen of the gods, who helped them, giving Jason a divine signal that allowed them to pass safely. This moment marked the beginning of a long series of divine interventions that would shape the course of their journey. The gods were not always on Jason's side, however. As with all Greek myths, the gods' favor was fickle, and Jason and his companions often found themselves at the mercy of divine whims. The Argonauts faced many more dangers along the way: monsters, treacherous seas, and deadly encounters. One of their most infamous trials was their encounter with the Harpies, monstrous creatures that tormented the blind prophet Phineus. These Harpies swooped down and stole his food, leaving him to starve. Jason and the Argonauts, with the help of the winged heroes Zeus and Calais, chased the Harpies away, freeing Phineus from his torment. But even this victory was not without cost. The Argonauts knew that the closer they got to the Golden Fleece, the greater the challenges they would face. And sure enough, as they approached the land of Colchis, the greatest trial yet awaited them. The final hurdle to obtaining the Golden Fleece was the task set by King Eurydice of Colchis, who promised to give Jason the fleece if he could complete a seemingly impossible task. He had to yoke to fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, and then sow the teeth of a dragon. From these dragons' teeth would spring a group of fierce warriors who would fight Jason, with the odds stacked against him. Jason might have failed, but once again the gods came to his aid. Medea, the daughter of King Eurydice and a powerful sorceress, fell in love with Jason and offered him her help. Using her magic, Medea gave Jason the strength and cunning to complete the impossible task. Jason yoked the bulls, plowed the field, and fought the warriors that emerged from the dragon's teeth. It was a victory that seemed to defy the odds, and Jason was able to claim the Golden Fleece only to find that his troubles were far from over. Jason's journey home was filled with even more perils. As if to prove that no victory ever comes without cost, Jason's return to Greece was fraught with betrayal, tragedy, and loss. Medea, whose love for Jason had once been the key to his success, was cast aside by him as he sought to marry another woman, Glauce, in order to solidify his political power. This decision led to a series of catastrophic events. Medea, feeling betrayed, took revenge on Jason in the most horrific way. She killed their children and Glauce, leaving Jason to suffer the consequences of his actions. Jason's fate, once so bright with the promise of the Golden Fleece, ended in tragedy. His own life, much like his journey, was a mixture of glory and despair. In the end, Jason found no peace, and he died alone, a broken man whose dreams had been shattered by his own choices. Some scholars still debate whether Jason's actions were a result of divine intervention or his own flawed nature. Was he a hero, or was he a man driven by ambition who ultimately paid the price for his decisions? Was his pursuit of the Golden Fleece a noble quest, or was it a journey that could have been avoided had he not been so consumed with the desire for power? Jason's story is one of great highs and devastating lows, and in many ways it serves as a reflection of the human condition itself. The pursuit of glory, of power, of success is a double-edged sword. For every victory, there is a price to be paid. The gods may grant us the strength to succeed, but they are just as quick to remind us of the consequences of our actions. Jason's journey to claim the Golden Fleece was a tale of heroism, but it was also one of loss, regret, and the realization that no goal, no matter how grand, is worth sacrificing everything for. The myth of Jason and the Argonauts reminds us that even the greatest of heroes are not immune to failure and heartbreak. It teaches us that the pursuit of glory, no matter how noble it may seem, often comes with unexpected consequences. In the end, Jason's fate was sealed not by the fleece he so desperately sought, but by the choices he made along the way. His story is a testament to the fragile nature of human ambition and the price that must be paid for success. It serves as a reminder that no matter how high we soar, the fall can be just as swift and just as painful. The night thickens as you walk through the darkness, and ahead of you stands the towering figure of Achilles, a hero whose name is synonymous with glory, strength, and tragic downfall. His tale, immortalized in the Iliad, is a story of greatness, intertwined with the deep, painful scars of fate. Achilles was a warrior unmatched in battle, the greatest of the Greek heroes in the Trojan War. Yet his own life was shaped by a singular, fatal flaw: his heel. His story is one of divine intervention, the pursuit of honor, and the inexorable pull of destiny, reminding us that even the mightiest among us can fall. You probably won't survive this one either, but that's what makes these myths so captivating, who are larger than life, yet doomed by their own nature. So, before you dive deeper into this story of valor and tragedy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And don't forget to comment below where you're listening from and what time it is. Let's see just how far Achilles' legacy has reached. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Achilles' story begins before he even drew his first breath. The prophecy surrounding his birth foretold that he would either live a long, quiet life or a short but glorious one. His mother, Thetis, a sea nymph, was desperate to ensure that her son would live a life of greatness, so she sought out the help of the gods. In a bid to make him invulnerable, Thetis dipped Achilles into the river Styx, holding him by his heel. This act rendered Achilles nearly invincible, save for the small patch of his heel where his mother had held him. It is said that this vulnerability would later be his downfall. Achilles' early years were marked by this divine gift of near immortality, and as he grew, his power became undeniable. His father, Peleus, a mortal king, watched as his son became a force unlike any other, a warrior whose strength and skill in battle were unmatched. As Achilles matured, the war in Troy began to loom on the horizon, and soon he found himself called to fight in the Greek forces campaign against the Trojans. It was here that Achilles' true glory would unfold. In the Iliad, he is presented as the embodiment of heroism, fierce, proud, and almost invincible. His strength on the battlefield was legendary, and his presence was enough to send fear into the hearts of his enemies. Achilles' rage and drive were fueled by honor, by the desire to be remembered as the greatest warrior to ever live. Yet, despite his power, Achilles was not invulnerable to the whims of the gods and the tides of fate. His pride and stubbornness would lead him into a conflict that would ultimately destroy him. The pivotal moment in Achilles' life came when Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, dishonored him by taking Briseis, a woman Achilles had captured and claimed as his prize. Infuriated by this slight to his honor, Achilles withdrew from the battle, refusing to fight for the Greeks. This act, though an expression of his pride, proved to be a turning point in the war. Without Achilles, the Greek forces began to falter, The Trojans, led by Hector, gained the upper hand. The tides of war shifted, and the Greeks, once confident of victory, now found themselves on the brink of defeat. Achilles, though stubborn and vengeful, was not immune to the suffering of his comrades. And when his close friend Patroclus was killed in battle while wearing his armor, Achilles' grief and rage knew no bounds. In his fury, he returned to the battlefield, seeking vengeance for Patroclus' death. It was at this moment that Achilles' tragic flaw, his pride, and his uncontrolled rage came to full fruition. Consumed by anger, he slaughtered Hector, the greatest of the Trojan warriors, in a brutal and vengeful act. He dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, a clear sign of disrespect and a final assertion of his dominance. The gods, watching from Olympus, took notice of Achilles' actions, and while his victory was undeniable, it was one that came at a great cost. Achilles' rage and his refusal to let go of his grief led him down a path of destruction, and in the end, it was not the Trojans who would bring about his downfall, but his own unrelenting pride. As with all great heroes, Achilles' story ends in tragedy. He was fated to die young, and his moment of glory on the battlefield would ultimately be his last. Paris, the prince of Troy, aided by the god Apollo, struck Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, his heel. The arrow, guided by the divine hand of Apollo, pierced Achilles' heel, and in that moment, the hero who was once invincible fell. Achilles' death marked the end of an era, and his legacy was sealed not just in his battles, but in his tragic end. The hero who sought immortality through his actions, through his desire to be remembered forever, became a symbol of the fleeting nature of glory. His death, though inevitable, left a world forever changed, as the Greeks were left to mourn their greatest hero and face the consequences of the war he had fought so fiercely to win. Some scholars still debate the meaning of Achilles' death. Was it the inevitable result of his pride, or was it the work of the gods, whose influence over mortal lives was often unpredictable and cruel? Was Achilles' death the result of his own hubris, a reminder that no mortal, no matter how great, can escape their fate? Or was it a warning about the dangers of seeking immortality through violence and power? In any case, Achilles' story is a complex one, filled with moments of both greatness and fatal flaw. He was a hero, yes, but he was also a man, and in the end, it was his humanity that led to his downfall. The gods may have granted him invulnerability, but they also granted him a fatal flaw, one that would haunt him to the very end. The myth of Achilles serves as a reminder of the fragility of glory, the cost of pride, and the unyielding nature of fate. His story is not just about a hero's rise and fall. It's about the choices we make, the consequences of our actions, and the inevitable march of time that even the greatest of heroes cannot escape. Achilles, in his quest for immortality, found not eternal life, but eternal suffering. His story is one of triumph, but also of the heavy price paid for seeking glory above all else. And in the end, it's not just Achilles who suffers, it's all those who are caught in the wake of his ambition. His tale, though filled with greatness, reminds us that even the strongest, the bravest, and the most powerful are not immune to the consequences of their choices. As the stars glitter overhead, you step into the final chapter of this journey, where the gods themselves stand at the brink of their own fall. Consumed by the passage of time and the weight of their own choices, the last days of the gods, the twilight of Olympus, is a tale not just of divine power, but of the eventual decay that even the mightiest forces in the universe must face. Throughout this journey, you've seen the rise and fall of heroes, the wrath of gods, and the consequences of ambition. But here, at the end, you see the gods themselves confronting the inevitable truth. Nothing, whether mortal or immortal, escaped the grasp of time. This is the story of the end of an era where gods who once ruled with absolute power must face the dissolution of their dominion. You probably won't survive this final tale either, but it is the inevitable conclusion to a cycle of creation and destruction that has been spinning since the dawn of time. So, before you walk into the realm of fading gods, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, I'll wait. And don't forget to comment below where you're listening from and what time it is, because even in the last days of the gods, their stories echo across time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The final days of the gods mark a time of great upheaval. For centuries, the Olympians had held dominion over the heavens, the earth, and everything in between. Their power was absolute, their influence far-reaching, and their presence on Mount Olympus a symbol of order and stability. But as the ages passed, cracks began to form in the foundation of their reign. The gods themselves, once eternal and unyielding, found that their once unquestioned authority was being tested by new forces. Some gods grew weary, their powers waning as mortals began to question the divine order. Others, like Zeus, the king of the gods, found themselves overwhelmed by the weight of their responsibilities, burdened by the eternal struggles of their own making. The gods, for all their strength, were not immune to the ravages of time. They had become figures of myth, revered and feared, but increasingly distant from the world they had once controlled with ease. The gods' decline began not with an external threat, but with an internal one, a loss of unity. The Olympians, once a family bound by common purpose, began to fracture as the different factions within Olympus sought their own power. Zeus, ever the ruler, tried to maintain order, but even he could not prevent the growing rifts between his siblings, children, and allies. Hera, his wife and queen of the gods, grew disillusioned with her husband's rule, her jealousy and anger becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Poseidon, the god of the sea, felt increasingly sidelined, resentful of Zeus's dominance over the heavens and earth. Hades, lord of the underworld, remained distant, isolated in his dark realm, while Athena, Artemis, and Apollo pursued their own agendas. In the end, even the might of the gods could not prevent the fragmentation of Olympus. As their unity broke down, the gods began to lose their influence over mortal affairs. No longer able to control the forces of nature with the same ease, they found that their very power was being undermined by the growing strength of human will and ambition. The gods, once supreme, had become relics of a bygone era. At the heart of the gods' downfall was the rise of the Titans, who, though defeated in their war against the Olympians, had not been entirely erased from existence. Over time, the Titans, whose imprisonment in Tartarus had never been permanent, began to stir. Their return to the mortal world was a symbol of the changing tides of power. The Titan, Kronos, father of Zeus, was said to be the first to rise, leading a revolt against the Olympians. His re-emergence was a reminder that no reign, divine or mortal, could last forever. The gods, in their arrogance, had forgotten that the cycles of time were beyond their control. In their pursuit of immortality, they had neglected to understand that even their power was finite. The return of the Titans, however, was not a simple reversal of fate. It was not the gods' defeat, but rather a symbolic moment that reflected the nature of existence itself. All things, no matter how powerful, must eventually give way to something new. Some scholars argue that the end of the gods was not just a mythological shift, but a commentary on the nature of divinity and power. The gods, like all rulers, had been subject to the whims of fate. They were not eternal in the way they believed themselves to be. The gods' decline, some say, was inevitable. The rise of humanity, with its capacity for creativity, invention, and belief in its own potential, had made the gods irrelevant. No longer were the gods seen as the arbiters of fate. They had become figures of legend, distant and unreachable. And so, as the last days of the gods unfolded, they watched as the world moved on without them. Their temples crumbled, their worshippers faded, and their once dominant presence in mortal lives dwindled to nothing more than stories whispered by the wind. Zeus, the god who had once ruled the heavens with unquestioned authority, found himself alone on Mount Olympus. His thunderbolts, once a symbol of divine wrath, now seemed like relics of a time long past. The very power that had made him the king of the gods was fading, replaced by the inexorable march of time. His once mighty grip on the heavens had loosened, and as he looked down on the world below, he saw a new era emerging, one in which gods had no place. Some myths suggest that, in the end, Zeus withdrew from the mortal world entirely, leaving behind only the remnants of his rule. Others say that the gods, recognizing their time had come, faded into the background, allowing humanity to rise and shape the world as it saw fit. The last days of the gods are a reminder that no power, no matter how great, is impervious to the ravages of time. Even the gods, for all their might, could not escape the inevitable changes that came with the passing of ages. The end of the Olympians was not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet fading, a slow retreat from the world they had once ruled. In their place, humanity rose, free to create its own future, guided by its own sense of morality, ambition, and destiny. The gods, once the focal point of mortal life, were no longer needed. The world moved on, as it always does, and the gods became just another part of the past fading from the world, but leaving behind the echoes of their once great power. And so, as you stand on the precipice of the gods' fall, you realize that their story is not just about their rise and fall. It is about the passage of time itself, and the way that all things, whether divine or mortal, must eventually give way to something new. The gods were once supreme, but their reign was always destined to end. Their story is a testament to the fleeting nature of power, and the reminder that even the gods, in their arrogance and pride, could not escape the inevitable. The last days of the gods are a reflection of the cycles of life itself an eternal reminder that nothing lasts forever. Not even the mightiest of beings.